It is April 11th, 1970. The United States' third mission to the moon blasts off. The time is 13 hours and 13 minutes. The mission's number is equally ominous, Apollo 13. As the spacecraft hurtles into space, a time bomb ticks away inside. An oxygen tank with an exposed electrical wire. 2 days into the mission, on April 13th, the bomb explodes.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt. Roger, main B undervolt. Okay, stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
Going from the life and death drama of astronauts in space to your own daily struggles in the workplace may seem like a bit of a stretch. But in fact, there are real lessons concerning management and organizational effectiveness to be learned from the Apollo 13 experience. If you can't respond effectively to rapid change and, of course, crisis, you'll be left behind by those who can. Over the course of this program, we'll be looking at Apollo 13 from a business perspective, as well as hearing more down-to-earth stories of corporations, both large and small, that have endured and responded to their own crises. We'll also be talking with top managers and an internationally known researcher and consultant on organizational effectiveness and change.
If there's a single theme, I would say empowerment.
Our authority and guide on this material will be Professor Mike Useem of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Useem specializes in developing strategies to help businesses deal with crisis and change. He's also an authority on how to build more effective corporate organizations and is widely published on both these subjects. Through his own research and experience, Professor Useem has identified 4 essential issues in the pursuit of competitive advantage.
Number one is how you make decisions. To what extent are you able to pull information up through the organization and have it at the ready to make good, effective, precise, and rapid decisions? The number 2 is the organizational system itself. How many divisions do you have? How do they link across? What kind of hierarchy is there? If you've got an organization that matches the strategy, you're a long way towards where you want to go. The number 3 is having the right kinds of incentive systems, performance appraisal devices, issues of responsibility and accountability worked out. This is a kind of high-octane fuel that helps drive people in the right direction, and at the same time, it's like a magnet and a compass. It lines people up, it aligns people with where the organization needs to go. And the number 4 is the act of leadership. And I don't mean leadership at the chief executive level or divisional level only. I mean leadership all the way through the organization, so that everybody has the familiarity with what it means to make a decision, to make it well, and to take an act that will push the apparatus forward.
For an example of Professor Useem's first point, how you make decisions, let's go back to Apollo 13. In the few minutes after the explosion, the flood of data coming down from the space capsule revealed that the mission's lifeblood, oxygen and power, were rapidly bleeding away. How NASA's management team interpreted this information and then made decisions over the next 4 days would decide the fate of Apollo's 3-man crew. As the crisis grew, Flight Controller Kranz made a simple request.
Can we review our status here, Si, and see what we've got from a standpoint of status? What do you think we got in the spacecraft that's good?
It was clear that Kranz needed all the relevant information he could get as quickly as possible. This, says Useem, is one of the key factors in any decision-making process. That process, according to Professor Useem, consists of 4 steps. First, decentralize decision-making and mobilize information gathering. Second, build teams for effective information collection and analysis. Third, empower and train teams to make risky decisions under pressure and uncertainty. And fourth, in the language of business, bring the market into the firm.
And I think the message I would offer is that the key thing here is to develop a set of mechanisms so you can make decisions well, you have a good information base that comes to bear on the decision, and in that sense are ready to sift through a whole bunch of competing priorities, a lot of pressure coming in this way.
Kranz needed more than just information. He needed to come up with some answers, quickly. But NASA, like many government agencies and corporations in the 60s and 70s, was a command and control organization. All the information funneled to Kranz to make the decisions. Kranz, however, a very capable manager, quickly saw that a top-down management style was not going to get the job done. He needed to make a change, and right away.
Okay, now let's everybody keep cool. Let's solve the problem, but let's not make it any worse by guessing.
What Kranz did is a textbook example of many of Professor Useem's principles for organizational effectiveness. He decentralized his information gathering and empowered his people to make decisions. He set up a special unit, the Tiger Team, to identify crucial problems and come up with solutions. It was this unit that devised a way to rid the space capsule's atmosphere of deadly CO2 and thought to have the astronauts retreat into the lunar module, which had its own oxygen and power supplies. In the end, the Tiger Team's ingenuity was a central factor in the crew's survival.
To sum it up as a management device, if you have empowered people and trained them to make good decisions and to work with risk and to know that the downside of a risk will often have no adverse bearing on your career, when you face this kind of a moment, this kind of a crisis, people then will step up to the plate, be able to make decisions, and put all those small pieces, hundreds of small decisions together to get these astronauts back, or in the case of a company, to turn it around and face a new market. If you think about the telecommunications industry now, AT&T and NYNEX and Bell Atlantic, or high technologies producers, Motorola, IBM and the like, they face not continual crises, but they face continual major decisions that are often tough judgment calls as to which way to go, requiring hundreds of people to put information together. I believe that if you're in this old mode of command and control, everything's coming down from the top, you certainly can make your company jump when you want it to go in a given direction, but you're much less likely to have that direction right than if you have this information flow, this continual telemetry coming up through the organization. Many firms, large and small, because of the shortened cycle time of products to market that we're facing now, because of higher quality and often less expensive products coming in from Malaysia and from Chile and elsewhere in the world, I think even small producers, small financial services companies have got to be able to dance on the hot plate.
Indeed, in today's competitive world, it's not just NASA that faces problems requiring rapid decisions and sophisticated information systems. Sport Obermeyer is in the volatile business of producing fashionable ski apparel. To meet changing customer demands, the company began producing more varied products. Like many businesses, they found themselves unable to predict precisely which products would sell and which wouldn't. The result was the company would sometimes overproduce less popular lines while underproducing lines that sold well. This posed a fundamental problem for Wally Obermeyer, Sport Obermeyer's vice president.
We discovered an interesting thing, which was that with about half the items in the line, we could project to within about a 15% accuracy, and that was with just 20% of the orders in. And that was fabulous. With that accuracy, we could go ahead and build and deliver to the shops. We had just one question: which half of the items?
The problem was that the company could never be certain which sales forecasts were right and which weren't. So Wally Obermeyer decided to re-examine how the company used information to make critical product forecasting decisions.
We sat around in a committee and forecast, and you might, for example, say, oh, I think we'll sell 1,200 units of this particular parka, and I might say 2,400 units, and a person over here might say 1,800, and we'd have 3 or 4 more people, but our average with that might be 1,800 units, and we would think that it's 1,800. Now that might be for one particular parka. There might be another parka where you said 1,800, I forecast 1,800, and this person said 1,800. The average is still 1,800. But on the first parka, where you thought 12, I thought 24, and the third thought 18, we had more difference of opinion. And so really the buying committee is structured to capture what our forecast is, as well as the difference of opinion. Analytically, we call that the forecast variance. The neat thing about this system of forecasting is that it enables us to know pretty well which forecast is likely to be good. And so what we do then is employ what we call risk-based production sequencing, in which we make the safer styles, those styles which have the more accurate forecast, first, and save what capacity later in the season, what we call reactive capacity, to be able to react to the actual demand that we receive from our ski retailers.
In short, says Professor Useem, Sport Obermeyer was able to make better decisions not just because they had more information, but also because they were interpreting the information they had more intelligently. As a result, the company was able to make far more accurate market predictions. Sport Obermeyer also improved the timeliness of their information system with retailers, so they found out immediately what was selling and where. This made it possible to order additional production quickly. In sum, Professor Useem says, Sport Obermeyer used their better information system to drive their decision process, as well as to bring the market into the company.
Companies have simply had to work out systems of more quickly knowing where that market's going and then making the change. This, in my view, fits in this under this broader rubric of what is sometimes called bringing the market in, bringing the market in. And the concept here, it's a very simple concept, is let's, in various ways, bring the market inside the organization. Sport Obermeyer, in that sense, asks all of its people that touch the market to independently make their forecasts, and then that becomes the information system.
And that, says Wally Obermeyer, made all the difference.
The neat thing about this whole process, which really began in part as more of an academic question of how could we forecast this demand uncertainty better, is that it's basically doubled our profits. And in an industry such as ours, where the average profit margin might be 3%, that's really well received.
But Obermeyer points out that good information gathering and sales forecasting are only the beginning of the process.
Accurately predicting sales is important, but that's not enough. It's really necessary to deliver a product in a timely fashion. So it's important to be able to coordinate it all, to first to design items that people want, A, B, to predict how much they will want of those items, and then C, to deliver it in a timely fashion.
Harbir Singh is a colleague of Mike Useem's at Wharton and a leading expert on designing strategies for gaining competitive advantage. He says Sport Obermeyer's improved information and delivery systems gave the company a critical leg up on its competitors, since it would be very difficult to replicate their overall strategy.
If you look at what Sport Obermeyer did in their strategy for connecting the marketplace to their production system, what they had was a very good and responsive system which could effectively respond to market demand. So that in a market where there's a lot of uncertainty in demand because of fashion trends, changes in colors, preferences, and so on, during the season, what they were able to do was to connect closely with the marketplace to look at the variance in demand estimation and pick the one that they could pursue. And that way, they were able, and in addition to that, they had good ties with suppliers, quick response feedbacks from the suppliers, so that even though the competition knew that that's what Sport Obermeyer was doing, it was hard to replicate that. To replicate this strategy would require not just the ability to be objective about the marketplace, but also superior information systems, very good ties with suppliers, and then an organization that is really responsive to connecting with the external world and putting the product together in a timely fashion and putting it out in the marketplace.
People really ask us how we've managed these changes that we've made, and they really have been quite dramatic. In fact, I call it a paradigm shift, because we've really changed the whole way we view our task of making demand meet supply. And I think the first thing to remember is that change isn't made overnight. It takes several years, and it's a continual process. The second thing to remember is that the customer is king, and our customers needed better delivery, and that's really what drove this whole project. Giving them better delivery then in terms enables them to satisfy the consumer's demand sooner, earlier, and it makes them more profitable. So it really helps the whole cycle.
To Professor Useem, the Sport Obermeyer example points out that you can't gain competitive advantage, that is, uniquely serve the needs of the customer, without having the information necessary to make the right decisions and a system in place to implement those decisions quickly. If the information system is designed well, such as in Sport Obermeyer's case, the reward may go right to the bottom line. This brings us to Professor Useem's second step, the need to match up the internal structure of a company with its strategic vision or goals.
The classic formulation of strategy and organization is get your strategy right first and then design your organization to go with that. Strategy first, structure second. Often, though, we've got a structure in place and we change our strategy, and now we've got a structure that does not work. I think a very good example of this moment is the aftermath of the divestiture of AT&T. 1984-85, AT&T, our telephone company, broken up into 7 regional companies, and those 7 regional companies, like AT&T before the breakup, had faced an uncompetitive market in the late 80s. By the early 1990s, though, the regional telephone companies, Bell Atlantic, NYNEX, Bell South, began themselves to face competition in their own traditional area, local telephone service, but also began to think of themselves as maybe cable operators or information providers. The problem that they've all faced, though, is they have a structure that went with the strategy of we are a monopoly provider of a utility service, local telephone service. Steady, 8%, 10% growth every year. Employment extremely secure. You go to work for AT&T in the old days, it was just like going to work for the civil service. It's a lifetime job. In the new days, though, it's really a different era. The competitive strategy for Bell Atlantic and NYNEX, very different. And both of those companies have taken a number of efforts to now redesign the internal structure.
Under the heading of aligning or matching up organizational structure and strategy, Professor Useem lists 4 steps. 1. Restructure the organization to reflect strategic changes. 2. Build strategic business units, or SBUs, with decision-making authority around clusters of products or customers. 3. Rebuild the organization to fit and support the new strategy. And 4. Focus attention on shareholder value.
For a good example of a company that remade its organizational structure to reflect its strategic vision, Mike Useem turns to Xerox. Like AT&T, Xerox had a monopoly, the copier business, which Xerox dominated up through the 1970s and early 80s. But the company came under attack from Japanese firms, which learned the technology, then gradually gained a competitive advantage over Xerox by producing lower-priced and better quality copiers. In the 1980s, Xerox decided to fight back, and soon began turning things around, improving quality and regaining market share. But when Paul Allaire assumed the company's top job in 1990, he still felt the need to make substantial changes at Xerox to position the company for the future. So he developed a new strategy for the company, Xerox 2000.
We say Xerox is the document company, and our strategic direction is to provide document services and solutions to our customers that enhance their productivity.
But shortly after Xerox defined that strategy, Allaire began to see that there was a clear conflict between where he wanted to take the company and how it was organized.
It became clear fairly early on in my tenure as CEO that the organization structure we had was not very effective for the future. And basically, we had sort of a traditional functional organization in the company with research and manufacturing and product development and sales service admin, and it all sort of came up through the functional lines on the whole company, and that meant that I was the only person responsible for the success or failure, for example, of a product, because one group was designing it, another group was manufacturing it, another group was selling and service it. Given where we're going with the strategy as a company, the way we were organized, we couldn't implement it. We were never going to get there. We had to be much more responsive to the market. We had to be much quicker in our actions, and we really had to break the company down into smaller units.
That move took Xerox through the first two of Professor Useem's 4 steps in the alignment of organizational structure and strategy. First, it redesigned the company to reflect changes in corporate strategy. And second, it organized that redesign around smaller units more closely tied to products and customers. Together, these steps helped to cultivate entrepreneurship.
I think what Xerox has done is what many companies worldwide are trying to do, and that is to build from the top down and from the bottom up at the same time. Coming from the top down, instead of seeing Xerox as one unified company where decisions get made at the top, where strategic planning is all a headquarters function, let's break it up around different classes of customers, maybe by region, maybe by type of copier, size of firm, and then let's make those units relatively autonomous. We'll call them a line of business, or the more generic term that's often used now is a strategic business unit, an SBU. The basic concept there is if I run an SBU, I, in a sense, run my own company. I make all the decisions. Paul Allaire at the top of Xerox, in a sense, is my board of directors. I'm accountable and responsible to him, but he's not going to tell me what to do because he doesn't know what I should do, except on the financial performance front. So he keeps my feet to the fire, but he's not going to tell me to pay people this or to hire people that. He is going to say, you get the job done, and I, as a line of business leader, Xerox has 9, will go out to do that. Many U.S. firms have adopted a SBU structure. AT&T has about 19 or 20. Many other firms have similar counts, 5 to maybe 15 or 20. DuPont has about 10 right now. The underlying logic here, I think, is absolutely on the mark. Let's divide people up. Let's group people around common sets of customers. That's how we know what they want. That's how we know if we're not delivering what they do want.
This new streamlined and entrepreneurial approach put the SBUs in much closer touch with customers and markets, allowing large companies like Xerox to be more flexible and responsive. For instance, Xerox set up an SBU to get the company into a new business, desktop color laser printers. David Kwiatkowski oversaw the team that rolled out Xerox's 4900 color laser, on schedule and under budget.
You need to really be market connected, because if the vision's wrong, if you don't know what your customer is going to do with it, if you don't know who's going to sell it, then as you get into the design, you find the need to make changes. And what we were able to do was understand where the product was going to be placed, how it was positioned, who was going to sell it. We knew what the customer was going to do with it, which allowed us to really firm up the deliverables, what the product's performance would be. Once we've locked in on the vision, then it was the goal was design as fast as possible, do a lot of testing, both from a market perspective as well as internal testing, and get it out.
Kwiatkowski and his team learned many first-hand, on-the-job lessons from the 4900 production process. One lesson was
not blinking. And what I mean by that is that once you start and you get it moving, if there's enough momentum, the product will happen. And if you stop and question yourself along the way, every day, you'll never get there. And it's, I heard a very good description of this, and it was like planting corn. And if you pull it up every day to see if it's growing, the results are it never grows. And the design is the same way. You have to understand where you're going, have faith that you're going to do it, and just move it forward.
that kind of entrepreneurship, says Xerox's chief, in turn helped the company with a key prerequisite to competitive advantage mentioned earlier, putting everyone in touch with a strategic vision, helping customers enhance their productivity.
We even have our research community engaged with the customers, and when we first told them they had to do that, get out and talk to the customers, the reaction was, who me, I'm a PhD, I went to research, I wouldn't have to do things like that. It took a little bit of time for them to understand that this was really good, and that they would be better researchers, they would be better technologists if they really had some feeling from the customer what the customer issues were and how they could resolve that. And now we have a research community that's telling the business divisions, you know, you really should be more aggressive on pulling this technology because your customers need this.
In making its changes, which also included a 10% reduction in the size of the workforce, Xerox found that redesigning the corporate architecture was the easy part. The hard part, Allaire says, was changing the organization so that it fit and supported the company's new strategic vision.
If you've grown people through a functional organization, you have great functional experts, and you don't have a lot of great general managers. You go to an organization that requires great general managers or good general managers, and you make a call on which of these functional experts can make the transition. Some can, some can't, and you're not always right.
Fuji Xerox, which is half owned by Fuji Photo and half by Xerox, also experienced difficulty in the transition process. Yotaro Kobayashi is Fuji Xerox's chief executive.
We had competition coming from all directions at us. That was a new experience for us. We had to become competitive in that sense. I think the most important thing that we did was to adopt this TQC, Total Quality Control. And it did require tremendous determination, not only on the part of management, but the company as a whole, to turn the company from perhaps proud but a little bit arrogant company to proud but realistic and humble the company.
Finally, says Useem, changes in strategic vision like those at Xerox and Fuji Xerox should show up on the bottom line. This is especially important, he contends, in an era of shareholder power, with investors everywhere expecting immediate results. And that gets us to Professor Useem's last point under the heading of organizational structure, the need to focus on shareholder value. It's true from the United States to Japan.
Overall growth rate is somewhat limited as compared to the 70s and 60s, certainly. Secondly, the wages have risen. General costs of operating in Japan have risen. For all those reasons, the shareholders have become very profit conscious. And of course, we have to look after the shareholders. They are a very important part of the stakeholders. They're not only one. We have to look for the customers, employees. But all that is changing the outlook on the part of Japanese companies to become a little more profitable.
Before we move on, let's quickly summarize Professor Useem's first two principles. 1, set up a way to gather information and make quick decisions. And 2, structure your company to reflect its strategic vision. Now on to the third principle, putting in place the right kind of incentive plan. Xerox, for instance, would not have been able to achieve its massive restructuring, Professor Useem contends, if the company had not paid attention to developing an incentive plan that rewarded change.
If you want to change something and you leave your rewards and recognition exactly the same, nothing changes because you're not walking like you talk. So you have to put it in your change process, a change in the reward and recognition approach.
In seeking to align incentives, responsibility, and accountability, Professor Useem says that managers must observe 6 rules of thumb. The first 3 have to do with compensation, the second 3 with corporate culture. 1, reward individual and team performance. 2, make compensation more contingent on performance. 3, move contingent compensation deeper into the firm. 4, refashion the culture to stress responsibility and accountability. 5, selectively recruit people who work well in a performance-based culture. And 6, empower and cross-train employees.
Let's look at what Paul Allaire did at Xerox. As they put in their new scheme, he did a couple things. He, first of all, put much more compensation at risk. Much more compensation at risk. That means at the end of the year, if things go well, I can do quite well. If things don't go well, I might have 20% or even 50% less of the income I thought was my due. In the old days, it was. I would get 98% of what I was expecting at the end of the year, even if I barely managed to come to work. So number 1 here is more compensation at risk, as they would say. Number 2 is many more managers down through the organization, sometimes all the way to the shop floor, are now on variable compensation, contingent compensation. Inconceivable 15 years ago that people, even in the blue-collar work ranks, would be willing to work under the regime where if you do well, you're going to be paid, and if you don't do well, you won't get paid as much. Once you create these SBUs and these microenterprises, it threatens to just sort of fly apart in all directions. So the crux here, I think, is solving a problem that is often called rewarding A while hoping for B. You want B to happen, but without realizing it, you're rewarding the A. You want people to be innovative, but you actually, if you really look at it, you're rewarding people for being cautious and always wearing the same clothes, for example. So the challenge here is to make these contingent compensation systems reward people for the work they do, which is now more measurable because you've got customers. They can tell you if you're doing well or not. And then linking that up through the organization so that what's rewarded down here in some way contributes ultimately to the company's final financial performance.
Professor Useem thinks Xerox came up with an ingenious solution to link its compensation plan with its strategy.
An SBU manager at Xerox at the end of the year will receive a bonus if the following three conditions prevail, and all three have to come in. He or she has to do well. The performance appraisal of their leadership has to be very strong. Their unit, their division has to do well, and the company has to do well. This is a kind of an orchestrating of human energy, if you will. The person, incentive to do well. The division, an incentive to do well. But if the company does not do well, the way this works is that zeroes everything else out. Individual, divisional, and company. All three come in, you'll be well rewarded. If one of those misses, your bonus may be zero. That, in my view, is an extremely powerful driver.
This concept of tying compensation to performance is growing in popularity, says Useem. It works with a wide variety of modern strategic visions because the more competitive the world becomes, the more critical it becomes to push for outstanding performance, a key ingredient of competitive advantage.
I've looked at the compensation of the top 8 people at 45 manufacturing firms going back to 1982. This is data provided by a compensation consulting firm. 1982, 2/3 of their compensation was fixed. They'd get it as long as they got to the office every day. 1995, 2/3 is variable. They've got to produce. And what really has changed in that is actually not so much the bonus. That's pulled out a little bit. The bonus, remember, is an annual year-end measure. What's really changed are the long-term compensation components. And that's what has radically expanded. And that, I think, is the good news, because the traditional criticism of incentive plans is it gets you on the here and now to be successful at the end of this quarter. What American firms have done, maybe like their Japanese competitors, is to leverage out the horizons of managers to say, my rewards are going to come if this company or division is doing well in 3 years, not just this year.
But money, argues Professor Useem, is not the only incentive to get people in sync with a company's strategic objectives. Some companies, like Southwest Airlines, achieve this alignment by setting up a corporate culture that guides employees towards the company's strategic objectives. Southwest, in fact, pays neither better nor worse than other airlines. It does, however, carefully select employees who will fit into the company's teamwork culture, and then spends extensive time and effort training them. Colleen Barrett is Executive Vice President of Southwest.
Selection is probably twice as important as training. The other thing is that we're very, very religious about letting people go if they get into the environment and we see that they aren't a fit. And that may sound a little bit cold for a company that prides itself on love and family and so forth, but it really isn't. I think we're doing the employee a favor as well as the company. You know, if you don't have a good sense of humor, if you take yourself too seriously, if you're stuffy and stiff, and if you're not a touchy-feely person, you don't fit in too well at Southwest.
In selecting employees, Southwest often consults with customers.
One thing that we do that I think is pretty unique and it's a lot of fun, our frequent flyer program is called the Company Club. We bring in company club members to help us do flight attendant interviews. I mean, we figure they're the ones that are dealing with our flight attendants on a very regular basis. They know what they want, they know what they like, and I'm not saying they make the ultimate decisions, but it's a fascinating process to have them sit in with us on group interviews and to give us their perspective from a customer viewpoint as to whether they think this person would be good or this person wouldn't be good. And they love it.
Southwest's employees and their focus on company goals have made the business very successful. The airline has made a profit every year it's been in operation since 1972. The goal of the airline is simple: give customers good value for their money. Southwest often has the lowest fare in its market and is committed to getting customers to their destination on time. Despite its low fares, USEAM says, Southwest makes money in large part because it needs fewer employees. Those it has are willing to go the extra mile, taking on tasks that are not in their job descriptions. Today, for example, these employees are learning about each other's jobs as part of Southwest's ongoing cross-training program.
It's very easy for people to criticize other people when they don't have an appreciation and understanding of what the other person's job is. So we spend an incredible amount of our time trying to assure that everyone knows what everyone else's job is and knows the frustrations that go along with it.
Cross-training it goes hand in hand with empowerment and with team building, a microenterprise. We want people who can work with customers, who are empowered to make decisions, who in a slow moment doing this activity will quickly move over to that activity. Southwest Airlines is very good at all the above. They do a lot of cross-training. So when service is slow in this area, we move our employees into some other area to work within the firm. And often that means radical cross-training. We're not talking about a second computer language. We're talking about moving people who are doing customer service into the financial accounting area. Empowerment, cross-training, training in general, these are the pieces, these are the foundations of making this microenterprise scheme work. Southwest, if you look at how they have people out there on the front line, has done it all, and it's a formula that customers seem to like because they come back.
Southwest's employees are both trained and empowered to make good, customer-oriented decisions.
We pride ourselves in our on-time performance. We stress it, we push it, we say, look, forget everything else. If the passenger doesn't get there when they need to get there, they're going to forget all the other good things that you want. So you don't hold airplanes for late running customers and that sort of thing. But for goodness sakes, if you have a paraplegic who is halfway down the jetway and you can see the person from the jetway door, you don't slam the door in the customer's face. Use some common sense, no matter what your rules are. And I think our people do a pretty darn good job of it.
According to Professor USEAM, Southwest's emphasis on recruitment, empowerment, and cross-training, like Xerox's incentive structure, motivates employees to pursue the larger strategic vision.
The competitive advantage is with a culture that has people energized and aligned. As new opportunities come along, employees are ready to seize that and bring it forward in the same sense that as solutions emerged in the back rooms during the Apollo 13 crisis, they were quickly brought out to the flight director. And that's a competitive advantage as opposed to the opposite. Let's think about what the opposite would be. You've got a sullen workforce, maybe a lot of union management conflict over there. You've got a chief executive who doesn't have much contact. Nobody's ever seen the person. So when there's a moment when they can step forward or step backward, they step backward. Why should I take the extra step for this company? A culture gets people to take that step forward.
Getting people to take that step forward has to do not only with corporate culture, but also, Professor USEAM emphasizes, with leadership, which brings us to his fourth point. Only through astute organizational leadership are managers able to act effectively on the other three principles. For an example, let's pick up the Apollo 13 story one last time at Houston's Mission Control.
I know all of us here want to thank all you guys down there for the very fine job you did. That's the firm, Joe.
Tell you, we all had a good time doing it.
Gene Kranz and his team have done all they can and now wait in radio silence as Apollo 13 makes its fiery plunge through Earth's atmosphere. From the moment Commander Jim Lovell informed Mission Control there was a problem, it was clear that this crisis demanded not only good decision-making, a new organizational structure, incentives and accountability, but also, in fact, above everything else, it demanded leadership. After all is said and done, it was inspired leadership that brought Apollo 13 safely home. Gene Kranz's leadership kept the various flight teams focused, while Kranz's ability to seek new solutions empowered his people and kept them on task. Kranz poignantly remembers to this day what it was like when he realized his leadership and the close teamwork of his controllers achieved a successful end to a troubled mission.
About the time that you see chutes, you'll see the cheering and the American flags come out. And then it's again tradition that you wait until the crew gets in the carrier deck, at which time cigars and the world map lights up. And shit. It was neat.
While few corporate managers will ever face what Gene Kranz faced, Mike Useem believes there are important lessons to be learned here. Kranz's actions, the professor says, illustrate the 4 essential steps of good organizational leadership. 1. Energize the ranks with vision and determination. 2. Build allies and change agents throughout the organization. 3. Persist in the face of resistance and opposition. And 4. Disperse leadership throughout the organization. When Bill Hanley, the CEO of Galileo Electro-Optics, sought to bring his company through a financially trying experience a few years ago, he practiced many of Professor Useem's leadership principles. For years, the company had been a successful manufacturer of night vision equipment. But with the fall of the Berlin Wall, its prime client, the Pentagon, reduced its business with the company dramatically. Galileo began to lose money and seemed headed for a bankruptcy. To save the company, Bill Hanley had to lead it where it had never gone before.
Leadership in time of crisis is all you have. It is the most important dimension to the change. It guides everything. Without leadership engaged, involved, active, and most importantly, visible, there's very little hope to weather the storm, if you will. What I did when the change was occurring was spent very little time in my office, matter of fact, almost no time, and spent all my time in the engineering departments, in the manufacturing departments, in the sales departments, in all the meetings.
For Hanley, as he reduced his workforce and reshaped his company's focus and strategy, the key to leadership was identifying and winning the loyalty of fellow believers, and then persuading them that the company could do more with less. This, says Useem, is an essential part of leadership. Recruiting allies, a core of people who will put your plan into action.
Whenever you're trying to create change that is very substantial, there are very few people who sign up for it. But you don't need many. What you really have to be able to recognize when you're leading the charge is who's on your team. Where are the core members that you can count on to be change agents, to lead the process, to participate with you and stick by you. You can't do it by yourself. Without those core people, you have no chance at all of being successful. And so what I did was I developed this core team or core group, if you will, that were really engaged with me in understanding what needed to take place here in order for us to survive and ultimately prosper.
In a 3-year period, Galileo reduced its workforce by nearly 2/3. And yet, productivity increased through every cutback, as the company changed its orientation to civilian businesses like fiber optics for Xerox copiers and medical imaging devices. Today, Galileo has gone from a company that sold almost entirely to the Pentagon to a company which sells 96% of its goods to the civilian sector. To make this huge shift, the company needed to reduce its costs and increase its quality.
Tell me about the call from Panos. Well, you know Panos, how very enthusiastic he is. He called, he was...
Hanley's reliance on core members to turn the company around highlights the importance of what Professor Useem terms the law of thirds.
Let's say you make a change, a strategic change that requires that people do their work differently. A third will go for it, a third will be indifferent, and a third will resist. The law of thirds comes out of the literature, research literature on empowerment. If you say, look, we're going to let you make decisions now, the thirds break down roughly that way. The crux of the, I think, success of many U.S. firms that have been able to turn the corner with an old workforce, the telecommunications industry, a good example, is to know that a third's going to get on board quickly. A third with good training and support will come around to the idea, yes, we can do it too. And a third will probably just opt for the early retirement, and you can bring new people in. That's the Galileo story in part.
When he started out, Bill Hanley's organizational structure and leadership style were, like Xerox before it restructured, very traditional.
The basic chain of command is all decisions are made at the top. All information filters through the top of the organization. It filters down layer by layer, the command and control sort of model. So the role the CEO plays is really the commander-in-chief, if you will. Hand on all the throttles, making most of the decisions day in and day out.
But part of Hanley's leadership has been his willingness to be the kind of leader the times require. One who is willing to give up day-to-day control in order to empower managers and business teams to be leaders in their own right, to make the key decisions themselves.
We run our entire company with teams now. I do not run Galileo anymore. I'm an internal consultant that spends time walking through the organization, talking to people. I'm excited that we have a team of aggressive people that really do understand what it takes to win. So we're not competitors anymore. We're winners. And that's why I'm excited about the future.
Professor Useem believes that Galileo and the other companies we've studied in this program suggest a causal connection between his 4 key principles for building effective organizations and competitive advantage. Before we close, let's go over those principles one more time. 1. Have a good decision-making process that's plugged into a top-notch information system. Apollo 13 and Sport Obermeyer amply demonstrate how this can work to an organization's benefit. 2. Design your company's structure to match its strategy, as Xerox did. 3. Build an incentive system that rewards those who pursue the company's strategy. Give people responsibility and then hold them accountable. Southwest is a good example of this, so too Xerox. 4. Energize and encourage leadership to move strategy forward, as Bill Hanley of Galileo did during his company's hour of adversity. But will these maxims hold true forever? What, in fact, will corporations and their internal structures look like in the future? We asked Professors Useem and Singh, as well as Bill Hanley, for a final thought on what's ahead.
I think the picture would look, at least as I see it, looks something like this. Having walked around many company headquarters and divisions and the like, flatter, leaner, more flexible, faster in making decisions, faster to market, more responsive to customers, more customer-focused, and the other side of that, at the same time, and this is a kind of paradox, more shareholder-focused.
I would add that we are moving away from formal structures to implement strategy to more fluid structures, team-based organizations, high-performance teams, interfunctional, people who work across functions, marketing and production. I think that therefore a more fluid response to what the customer wants.
I think the companies that are going to be successful in the next decade are masters of change, not people who embrace the way it used to be done and stagnate, but people who are constantly reinventing themselves day in and day out, to the point of as soon as they introduce a new product that's taking off, they have its obsolescence in hand, if you will. So I think it's all about mastering change today.
Mastering change today. Not a bad summary of what Mike Useem views as the central challenge now facing business, and not a bad place for us to end. For sheer drama, the challenges facing your business may not be in the Apollo 13 class, but they will matter a great deal to you. And you'll want and need to be just as well prepared to cope with them. For the Wharton School, I'm Paul Solman.